The regional security agenda is now dominated by Iran. And as is often the case with Iran, we are asking ourselves whether or not the regime is in real danger or not. The wave of riots that we've seen now over the past month have been unusual in their geographic distribution. They're happening throughout Iran, in all Iran's provinces, and in the tone of the demands of the protesters, which are not limited to particular causes such as the economy or indeed to elections and electoral procedure, which we saw in previous protests. But they're focused on the regime itself and on the past of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. So that does make them slightly different. However, what we're also seeing is the classically strong response from the regime. It's gone for both a physical and a virtual clampdown on the protesters, denying them the oxygen and denying them also the means of mobilization. Whereas the regime is very unsettled by this, and I would note it's unsettled by the demography of it. It realizes that it has lost its legitimacy or is in danger of losing its legitimacy and appeal to Iranians under 30. It won't yet feel as though this is the end game. It has immense experience in dealing with internal dissent. Its security, intelligence, law enforcement agencies are geared primarily towards the suppression of dissent under the mission of protecting the revolution. And they would feel that they are able to deal with this. I think what's particularly interesting about these protests is it is a rehearsal and a foretaste of how eventually the regime will go. This is not a regime that has very much negotiating room. The Islamic Revolution relies upon a structure of bodies and organizations which have to hang together, otherwise the whole system will crumble. So there's no room, for example, on electoral processes. There's no room really for negotiation over the primacy or the conduct of the security and intelligence services. There may, however, be a little bit of room for negotiation over the social demands, particularly over women's headdresses and the freedoms enjoyed by women in public spaces and assembly. It's possible that some concessions may be made there. It will, however, be reflecting on how it passes the torch of the revolution onto the next generation, who seem, on the basis of these protests, to have ever decreasing interest in perpetuating the Islamic regime. And that is a deep-seated problem, which even if the regime succeeds in containing these protests, it will at some point have to address. And of course, everyone in Iran is mindful that Ayatollah Khamenei has not been well. He is old, and when he finally dies, there will be a transition which could be traumatic for Iran.
This past year has been an unprecedented one in terms of regional diplomacy. We have seen détente almost across the board. However, we haven't seen this détente really translate into solid agreements, security arrangements, and so the region remains in turmoil. It's not as if the big issues have been resolved, whether it's Iran's nuclear program, regional competition, issues of transnational terrorism, or the deployment of new military technologies across the battlefield. So the Manama dialogue this year will seek to see how the region is managing all these issues, but also put this in a global context. Obviously, with the war raging in Ukraine, with the Russian invasion, and the global impact, whether it's on geopolitics or on the economic front, the Middle East is very exposed to these dynamics. So how regional countries position themselves and try to navigate those turbulent times is going to be at the heart of this year's discussion. So the most notable new alliance in the region has been since 2020, the one between Israel and the signatories to the Abraham Accord, namely the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. And we saw those four countries alongside Egypt, Jordan, and the US discuss more in terms of regional security, whether it's air defense, early warning, greater intelligence cooperation, and so on. The US is putting heavy emphasis on that. Israel is engaged. It sees that as a way to increase its regional integration. On the other side, Arab countries also welcome that. However, they are concerned about the political sensitivities around this. And so while the relationship is likely to strengthen on the security and technological level, there's still a question mark about how far it can go politically. Importantly, Saudi Arabia has refrained from joining that at the moment, because Saudi Arabia, as the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic and Arab worlds, is very worried about the perception that it offers Israel peace without something tangible for the Palestinian people. So there are limits, despite the fact that on big strategic issues, especially Iran and the concern about US retrenchment from the region, there's an agreement.
Russia is seeking forms of support and ways of reducing its international isolation from Middle Eastern countries. It now finds itself, globally speaking, very isolated, and it's natural it should look to the Middle East in the first instance. Before the invasion, Russia had pulled off the difficult trick of establishing cordial relations with pretty much every Middle Eastern country, even those countries in the region with bad relations among themselves. And in particular, Russia has sought ways to mitigate the effects of sanctions, of Western sanctions against it. It is a member of the OPEC Plus agreement, and that organization recently agreed to restrict global oil supplies. That raises the price. That's very welcome to Russia. It's very unwelcome to Western governments. In addition to that, we've seen the UAE and other countries buy assets in distress sales that Western companies are selling as they leave Russia. And I think most intriguingly of all, we've seen the efforts of some Middle Eastern countries to broker agreements between Russia and Ukraine. Saudi Arabia played an important role in the recent prisoner exchange, and Turkey, particularly the talks in Istanbul, have facilitated the agreement to allow Ukrainian grain shipments to leave Ukrainian ports. So if one is looking globally, I think, there's no more important regional relationship right now for Russia than with the Middle East. I think there are three reasons why Middle Eastern countries need to pay close attention to the Russia-Ukraine war. The first is that this is, in effect, the third major power conflict in Europe in the past century. Now, Western countries aren't yet fighting in the war, but they are actively supporting a country at war with Russia. This could escalate in unpredictable and globally dangerous ways. So it needs to be followed very closely. The second reason is that the war has already produced some very significant, larger international consequences, in particular economic ones, and especially commodities price inflation, oil and food in particular. Now, high oil prices have been good for some Middle Eastern countries, but they've been bad for others, in particular the food importing countries. This is in turn producing global economic turbulence, which I think, again, is worrying and could get worse. The third reason is that this war is ushering in a new dawn of geoeconomics. Western countries are honing and applying potent new instruments of economic warfare, in particular in the energy sector. We see now emerging in the West, in effect, an effort to create an oil buyers' cartel against Russia. That's a very significant precedent. That is something that other major oil exporters, including those from the Middle East, need to pay very close attention to. It could have longer-term implications for them too.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a good lunch, and those of you who had some bilaterals over the course of lunch, that they were useful and productive. We now come to our final plenary session of the day, the fourth plenary session on the theme Middle East Initiatives for Regional Conflict Resolution. I confess that when we first looked at the agenda title for this last session, we had simply Regional Conflict Resolution, and it occurred to me that since a core purpose of the Manama dialogue is for those outside the region to hear the voice of those in the region, it was right to frame this discussion around Middle East initiatives for conflict resolution, whether structural or diplomatic or others in kind and form, in order to give proper expression to the strategic initiative that this region, like other regions, should probably take about its own situations. And we're delighted to have as three speakers here. First, Dr. Fuad Hussein, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iraq, who was with us last year as well. We thank him again for returning to the Manama Dialogue. Dr. Naif Al-Hajraf, who I think is making his third consecutive appearance at the Manama Dialogue. I remind people that we were a rather brave lot when in December 2020, before any vaccines, we nevertheless had 22 defense or foreign ministers deployed here. There were only 80 formal delegates in total, 40 in this room, 40 in another room, all carefully spaced, and yet we were able over lunch to have all 22 gathered, and Secretary General Najaf was part of that COVID-busting face-to-face diplomacy that we were able to engage with here. And a real delight to have Anniken Huitfeldt, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway. We know the long tradition of diplomacy and conflict resolution that Norway carries on. They were, of course, famously the authors of the Oslo process in the Middle East, and it's important to have one external voice in this panel. So with that lengthy preface, it's a delight to ask Dr. Fuad Hussein, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iraq, to address this concluding plenary of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أصحاب السمو والمعالي المحترمين.
Royal Highnesses, Excellencies,
المدير العام الرئيس التنفيذي
Director General and CEO of the IISS,
والسادة الحضور.
ladies and gentlemen,
السلام عليكم.
may the peace of God be upon you.
يسعدني أن أشارك في
It is a pleasure for me to take part in the Regional Security Summit, the Manama Dialogue, in its 18th edition. I would like first to thank the government of the Kingdom of Bahrain for the efforts done in order to guarantee the success of this conference. I would like also to thank it for its hospitality. I would like to congratulate Mr. Abdel Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bahrain, for heading this conference, for his sponsorship and for his interest in this conference. I would like also to thank Dr. John Chipman, the Director General and Chief Executive of the IISS, for all the efforts exerted to hold this conference. Mr. President, we are meeting today in light of big challenges and in light of exceptional circumstances the region is going through. This is why we need to unify our efforts in order to face them. We need to resort to dialogue in order to create a stable environment that guarantees life and dignity for the people of the region, so that all the population would benefit from prosperity and well-being. And during this conference, we would like to come up with some concrete results and outcomes that will allow us to face the challenges and to find the suitable solutions. we highlight the need to promote the international and regional cooperation as well as joint efforts in order to achieve peace and security. And I would like here to mention the strategic importance of the Middle East at the political, economic, social, geographic level because of the geopolitical characteristics of this region. Indeed, this region can be the starting point for the well-being and peace all over the world. This can be done by adopting serious steps in order to put an end to conflicts and wars in the region, because it's not in our interest to see this region facing instability and tension. This summit is very important because it deals with various problems and aspects with the participation of experts coming from all over the world. This summit is an important opportunity to find the suitable outcome and solutions to put an end to instability in the Middle East in particular and in the world as a whole. It is also important to preserve international and regional peace and security. Ladies and gentlemen, security is one of the most important pillars and determinants of stability in the region and in the world. It will allow generations to achieve development. You all know the role that Iraq has played in order to face extremists, mainly the ISIS. The government of Iraq is still cooperating with all of the countries of the world, and mainly the Arab countries, in order to promote international measures that would put an end to terrorism, not only in Iraq, but in the region and in the world as a whole. In addition to that, we are working seriously to prevent foreign fighters or other suspects from entering any territory. We are also working with the task force on the international and foreign fighters to implement the recommendations of Security Council Resolution 2178 issued in 2014. We call upon all countries to meet their obligations based on international resolutions pertaining to fighting terrorism and to disclosing the places where money is being stored and where assets are being kept, by also stopping or eradicating all sources of funding for ISIS. Iraq is also working and promoting cooperation at all levels. It is working on drafting memorandum of understanding with the various countries and the Gulf countries in order to promote cooperation when it comes to security and economic diplomacy. Iraqi diplomacy is also working hard to establish strong relations with all of the countries and with all of the UN entities, with international and regional organizations, in addition to the European Union, in order to preserve the achievements that were achieved by Iraq and in the neighboring area. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to mention today the crisis of COVID-19 and the negative repercussions on the world. We also mention the international and regional efforts to recover by taking exceptional measures in order to reduce the impact of this pandemic on the populations. This led to the discovery of the suitable vaccines. We all are aware of the big challenges that loom ahead in this region and in the world because of the repercussions of the climate change. Indeed, the whole world is affected because of global warming and the increase of CO2 emissions. And because Iraq is supporting the international community to achieve a clean environment and to guarantee the future of the earth and of future generations, we support all initiatives and international measures aimed at reducing the impact of climate change and aimed at finding the suitable solutions in order to guarantee our environment. And we would like to pay tribute to the COP27 that was hosted by the Republic of Egypt between 6th and 18th of November, and we also mentioned the important outcomes of this COP. You all know the different challenges and difficulties that are threats for security and for peace at the regional and the international level because of the repercussions of the Russian war on Ukraine, because these repercussions are felt in the Middle East, and these repercussions have affected the world economy, especially because of the shortage in food and energy. This is why it is important to reach an understanding between all of the countries in order to solve these issues. Political security and economic stability is still far, and this is why the international community has to take serious measures and procedures in order to find concrete solutions that would put an end to all disagreements by resorting to dialogue, by resorting to the table of negotiations, and by highlighting common interests. It is therefore important to solve the conflicts, especially the conflicts in the Middle East. This is a priority to establish peace and stability. Among these issues, it is important to find a permanent solution to the Palestinian question by providing the Palestinian population with the right to self-determination according to its will. We need to reach a peaceful and just solution to the Palestinian issue based on the international resolutions, and this will allow us to achieve stability in the Middle East. The crisis in Yemen also is creating instability, and this will have long-term repercussions on the countries of the region. In this regard, Iraq highlights the importance to resort to dialogue between all of the parties to the conflict and to solve the issue in a peaceful manner. Iraq also supports all efforts aimed at promoting truth so that a final solution can be found. At the same time, we support all of the negotiations and international talks pertaining to the crisis in Yemen in order to guarantee the rights of Yemeni and to restore stability and peace to this country. Iraq also supports the resolution of the Libyan crisis by promoting the national interest, by unifying the Libyan institutions away from any intervention, and also, we would like to call upon the international community to support all efforts needed for peace and stability to be back again to Libya. It is an important step in order to achieve stability in the region as a whole. In this context, we would like to remind you that regional cooperation should be considered as the main objective for the countries of the region in order to put an end to tensions and crises. This is why Iraq is adopting a clear public or foreign policy based on having common views, and the positive impact was felt since many important meetings were held in order to bring closer the viewpoints of the various parties. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, the government of my country is keen on preserving the democratic experience in Iraq and is working towards strengthening the stability of Iraq. A new government was established in October after free elections were held in my country with the support of the United Nations, the League of Arab States, and the European Union. These elections led to choosing the Speaker, the President of the Republic, in addition to establishing the government, so that the democratic process is preserved and so that we can meet the ambitions of the population. Among the priorities of the government, to work fast in order to develop services that are important for citizens. It is also important to support the most vulnerable categories, to reform the economic and financial sectors, and to fight corruption, in addition to provide a dignified life, well-being, prosperity for the citizens of Iraq. At the international level, the government of Iraq is keen on preserving the international partnerships and to establishing the best regional relationship based on mutual respect, the respect of interests. We are also relying on the fraternity and the social links with the countries of the region so that we can face all together international challenges in light of the circumstances we are going through when it comes to conflicts and crises that necessitate unifying all efforts in order to face them and to solve them in a peaceful way. In conclusion, we wish you success in this conference, and we hope that you will reach important outcomes, and let us all work together and have common stances and positions so that we can face all of the challenges that we are facing and so that we can build a better future for all of the populations of the region.
Deputy Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed. As you all know, the GCC from the days of its foundation was intended to be a core geoeconomic body for engagement with different parts of the world, and it's really a delight to have the Secretary General of the GCC here with us to explain the importance of, if I can put it this way, GCC centrality in these regional affairs. So, Secretary General, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for addressing us on this theme, and also, I know, on the way in which the GCC wishes to engage economically with other parts of the world. Secretary General.
In the name of God, prayer be on our Prophet Muhammad and his companions.
Before I start my speech, just 2 minutes remarks on what we heard last night from the President of the European Commission's keynote speech. She was answering a question related to the GCC EU FTA toward the end of her sessions. And although I asked to speak last night, but for logistics purpose that Dr. Shebman has explained, I fully understand. I've met with Madam President after dinner, and I explained that the GCC EU FTA has been on track for almost 30 years. A situation that does not reflect the strategic relation between the GCC and the EU, in which we are so keen to enhance to serve our mutual interests. Whether it is a delaying within the EU mechanism, this is something entirely up to that. We do respect, but we cannot be blamed to not be the active partner talking about the economic relation with many blocs around the globe. So my message to our friends in the EU at this podium, and I'm sure Madam President already heard this last night, we are ready when you are ready. Dr. Joe Shepman, Director General and Chief Executive IISS, ladies and gentlemen, allow me first to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Shepman and his team for their tireless effort to bring us back to IISS 18th Manama Dialogue 2022 at such a most needed time. Manama Dialogue 2022 is a unique platform for government ministers and policymakers researchers, and business community to debate the most pressing foreign policy, defense, and security challenges regionally and globally. In this regard, it's a great honor to join esteemed panelists in this session to address Middle East Initiative for Regional Conflict Resolutions. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the history, the Middle East has been a region with great initiatives, yet with a major and ongoing conflicts. Today, I would like to focus on one great initiative which was introduced and implemented almost 42 years ago, the establishment of the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf, known as the GCC. On May the 25th of 1981, the GCC was established by its 6 member states: United Arab Emirates, Kingdom of Bahrain, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Sultanate of Oman, State of Qatar, and the State of Kuwait, forming a cooperation framework to address mutual security and prosperity, and to enhance the brotherly relation between the member states and its people. Over the last 42 years, the GCC have shown a great ability to deal with challenges and threats, as well as maintaining a stabilizer role in the region and the world security and stability. From the Islamic Revolution in Iran to the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, from the Afghan war to what's so-called the Arab Spring, the long-standing Palestine-Israel conflict, the aftermath of the 9/11, and more on. Despite all of these challenges and more, the GCC remains resilient and maintaining its constructive role with the international community for maximum cooperation and an advocate for peace, dialogue, and prosperity. Over the last 42 years, the GCC contributed greatly and still to the world economy, not only by maintaining undisrupted supply of energy, but also by stabilizing the world energy market. Over the last 42 years, the GCC's sovereign wealth funds demonstrate a stable investments policy in the global capital markets and play an important role on the world economy. Over the last 42 years, the GCC countries launched a massive development plans focusing on human capital as well as major infrastructure development and the transformation journey that is next to none. Over the last 42 years, the GCC fulfilled its commitment within the international community to combat terrorism and extremism ideology, fight poverty, helping countries in need, and become a voice of integration and harmony. As a result, the GCC countries are very well positioned in global development indexes as a well-deserved position, leading by example and setting a GCC standards, which are available for everyone. An initiative that created a trusted partners, which become the voice of wisdom. An initiative which was focused on collective effort to maintain the stability and security for its member states, the region, and beyond. Today, and for more than 42 years, this initiative stands solid, firm, and progressing as the most successful, energized, and dynamic regional organization. Needless to say that the last 42 years weren't challenge-free. However, the GCC journey remains focused and stable toward its objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, Since we last met during the 17th Manama Dialogue 2021, almost a year ago, the world entered into uncharted path, where thick cloud of uncertainty, a great deal of ambiguity, and very complicated challenges dominating the global and regional agendas. Today, as a new challenge emerge and remain real at the geopolitics and geoeconomics fronts, the region's security, which is very important to the world security, needs to be addressed, as well as new initiatives needs to be introduced, which could lead to balanced engagement, open dialogue for better understanding, a more focused action, and commitment to deliver. We believe that restoring peace, security, and prosperity in our wider region requires the full implementations of the rule of international law and the UN Charter. In other words, respecting for the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrities, a commitment to resolving disputes by peaceful means and non-interference in internal affairs. Working together is a must. Working together to address such challenges, we are far much stronger, more effective, and better off to deal with any challenges if we decided to work together and collectively to maximize our resilience. From Yemen to Syria, from Iraq to Libya, Lebanon, Palestine, Horn of Africa, Afghanistan, the Russian-Ukraine war, food security, energy supplies and economic growth, cybersecurity, terrorist threat, and climate change. We all have seen the world economy looming, the supply chain disrupted, the unemployment rate climbing, small and medium business badly affected, interest rate increasing, inflation rising, the global economy outlook remains uncertain. It is the greatest economic challenge we are all facing that requires collective effort to address a great deal of cooperation to mitigate, all of which require more initiatives to make the world a better place for our children and grandchildren. The GCC remains committed to work with the world to maintain and enhance the regional and global security. The GCC continues to put forward initiatives to help building a better understanding, not only to address challenges, but also to capitalize on mutual opportunities. The GCC Peace Initiative in Yemen 2011 and its implementation mechanism, the Saudi Arabia Green Initiative and Middle East Green Initiative. Manama Dialogue itself is an initiative since 2004. Talking about energy security, OPEC Plus is an initiative due to the post-pandemic economic reality, just to name a few. Ladies and gentlemen, since Manama Dialogue focus on regional security, two issues remains vital to the overall security and stability of the region and beyond. One, the Palestine-Israel long-standing conflict, which required the full implementation of the UN resolutions. The two-state solution based on the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, supported and adopted by all GCC, the Arab League, and the OIC countries, is the way forward, with a recognized Palestine state in the June 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as their capital. It is a time to put an end for 75 years of ongoing conflict. Two, the Iranian nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA of 2015, in which we at the GCC demand that any new regional security architecture should take in consideration the interests of all in order to meet the desired stability in the region. It is extremely important that the Iranian behavior to destabilize the region, Iran nuclear program, Iran ballistic missiles, and Iran supports to Houthis and other militias around the region. Vienna talks should not be limited to the JCPOA, but should address all of the above. In this regard, I would like to quote President von der Leyen of the European Commission from her keynote speech last night at this stage. I quote, "Several Gulf countries have warning for years about the risk that Iran feeds rough nations around the world with the drones. It took us too long to understand a very simple fact, that while we work to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, we must also focus on other forms of weapon. Proliferation from drones to ballistic missiles. It is a security risk, not just for the Middle East, but for all of us." End quote. Ladies and gentlemen, great initiatives are welcome. GCC will always be part of the solution. A platform like this is what we need. We need to share ideas and thoughts. We need to identify common challenges and create better understanding. We need to believe in our collective effort. We need to fulfill our moral and historical obligations toward the future generation. So let's wait no more. There is no better time than now. Thank you very much.
Mr. Secretary General, thank you very much for
شكرا حضرة الأمين العام لهذه الملاحظات وأمل أن تكون المفاوضات بين المفوضية والمجلس سريعة وأن نتمكن
that both sides I know aspire to. And thank you very much for endorsing the IISS Manama Dialogue as an institution that can help generate these trans-regional understandings. Very kind of you, sir. Thank you very much. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway, the floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me here today. Let me start by saying I represent a small country that has no tradition nor strength to force our will on other countries. Quite the opposite. Putting pressure on neighboring countries requires that you are more powerful than them. We know perfectly well from our own history, in any conflict with our neighbors, we will be the weakest part. When might is right, Norway will always lose. That is why we are so dependent on international law and predictable rules. And that is why peace and reconciliation is one of the pillars of Norwegian foreign policy. Not because I think we are more peaceful or kinder than others, but because peace is in our self-interest. Peace in any corner of the world will not only benefit the parties in a conflict and the people suffering from it, it will benefit us all. So Norway can never and will never force anyone with military means, but we can facilitate talks, assist the parties in a conflict to find common solutions, common ground. For us, that's a long-term investment, aimed at contributing to a more predictable world. For many years ago, we have been engaged in conflict resolution and mediation efforts, from Colombia to the Middle East, in Afghanistan, Sri Lanka and the Philippines, and other corners of the world. We facilitate negotiations and we support various regional cooperation initiatives. Sometimes only, negotiations succeed, and sometimes they fail. In fact, most often they fail, in the sense that they don't reach the final lasting peace agreement. But even then, the efforts can reduce civilian suffering. For example, through temporary ceasefires or the establishment of humanitarian corridors. And when we succeed, when peace and prosperity replace war and suffering, the gains are so large that this alone makes all our efforts worthwhile. But we know that facilitation alone can never secure any peace. Only the parties themselves can do that. If there is no will for peace, there is no way for peace. Take, for example, Israel-Palestine conflict. We have been engaged in that conflict for very many years. Norway's capital, Oslo, is linked to the mutual recognition between Israel and PLO almost 30 years ago, when they also recognized that the only negotiated political solution can ensure sustainable peace. Now, there has been not real negotiations since 2014. That's 8 years. But we will remain committed, but also pragmatic. Our role and the role of any facilitators or mediators requires that the parties have a genuine will to reach a political agreement. I have urged the parties to mobilize that will, to create a political horizon together, and to restart political talks. No political solution could lead to more violence and a deterioration in the security for ordinary people on both sides. Peace processes also need a strong support by the region to become sustainable. And if there is will, there is a way. 2 years ago, Bahrain signed a normalization agreement with Israel, the Abraham Accords. United Arab Emirates, Sudan and Morocco also signed deals with Israel. It was a milestone. I commend the parties for their willingness to find common ground. Other positive developments in the region is the closer contact between Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and between Turkey and Israel. And Mr. Hussein, the dialogue between Saudi Arabia and Iran, facilitated by Iraq, and the intense UN and regional efforts for a long-term ceasefire in Yemen. These are truly positive developments and vital for ensuring sustainable peace and development in the Middle East and beyond. As an elected member of the UN Security Council for the last couple of years, we have focused on many of the conflicts in the Middle East, such as Syria and in Yemen. Our engagement will remain high for many reasons, such as terrorism, a threat to the region and to Europe as well. On maritime threats, energy, climate, human rights, I could go on. The list is long. My point is that conflict in this region has consequences far beyond the Middle East, just as conflicts in the corner of the world where I come from have consequences far beyond Europe. In Europe, we have taken peace almost for granted since 1945. We cannot do that anymore. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has strengthened our conviction that a rules-based international order is in all our interests, and that when states try to force their will on their neighbors, in the end, everybody loses, even the aggressors. As a neighbor to Russia, we feel more vulnerable today, Russia's largest nuclear arsenal is located only 100 kilometers from the Norwegian border. We are therefore totally dependent on the security guarantee within NATO in order to protect our borders to an unpredictable neighbor. And Russia's war on Ukraine is felt everywhere. In the Middle East, it affects markets, it affects energy prices, and it also affects food security. Global growth could cease and be replaced by recession and inflation. But the consequences of this war could also be an incentive for more regional cooperation, building stronger cooperation between states on common challenges, from climate to youth unemployment, will contribute to stability and also development in this and other regions. Finding regional solutions and creating peace will not only benefit the Middle East, but all of us. The Manama dialogue is an important platform for discussions on how to reach those solutions. I look forward to continuing our talks on how we, together, best can contribute. I thank the International Institute for Strategic Studies and the Kingdom of Bahrain for hosting this dialogue, and I can guarantee that Norway will continue to be a pragmatic partner for those who share our commitment for a sustainable peace in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll follow the form of this morning, that I'll invite crisp comments and questions from the floor, try to group them maybe 6 or 7, and then come back to the panel. Again, I think to give tactical warning to the panel in the first round, I'll invite those to respond in the order in which they originally spoke. So Deputy Prime Minister, Secretary General, and then Foreign Minister of Norway. So with that as the rules of engagement for this afternoon session, can I ask first Regida Dergam?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Can I ask my question in English to the Foreign Minister of Iraq, or does he prefer that I ask it in Arabic? بتحب تفضل بالعربي ولا بالإنجليزي? All right, so I'll start a question to you first, sir. It seems that the new government of Iraq is very much Iranian inclined, and as you know, criticism has been leveled by the United States over some appointments that were seen as part of the militias of Iraq. What is it that keeps you more Iranian inclined rather than think the other way to the sort of right to your left there to the Gulf states, for example, specifically that you see the whole world criticizing Iran more and more? What are you planning to do, and are you still facilitating that dialogue between Saudi Arabia and Iran? Has it gone to its 5th round? Will it go further? And Dr. Hajraf, as you correctly said, the president of the EU was rather courageous in admitting that they belatedly understood the warnings that have been leveled by the Arab world altogether and the Gulf states about the Iranian menace in the region. But there was no policy declared. There's been, right, mea culpa. But mea culpa is not a strategy. It's not a policy. What is it that you think you need from the Europeans and the United States to pronounce themselves on Iran so that they have a coherent policy, a strategy? And on your own, you kindly, I understood what you said about the JCPOA. You just said that, yeah, you want to be on the table again. They're saying that it's not active. No, they're not saying it's dead. Yes, I agree with you. But what else are you proposing so that you could come forward with a strategy towards the shift, at least mood amongst the Europeans, and in as far as the actions of Iran in the Arab countries that you mentioned, in particular Iraq, Lebanon, and of course Syria and Yemen. Thank you very much.
Yasmin Farouk from France.
Thank you very much. I have two questions, since the title of this session is about Middle East initiatives for regional conflict resolution. The first one is to His Excellency, Dr. Al-Hajraf. Has there anything that could have been tried in Yemen and that still hasn't been tried? And if you want to remain as diplomatic as possible, you can just say yes or no. And the second question is to His Excellency, the Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. First of all, I get to ask you a question once a year. I hope we'll end up having a full conversation one day. I'll make it in Arabic if you want. يعني التقارير الصحفية
The recent reports, media reports, talk about a rupture of dialogue between the KSA and Iran. The reports also talk about the change of government in Iraq that will not help resuming this dialogue, in addition to what is happening now inside Iran and the threats that were announced by KSA and US. So, is there any chance that Iraq gets back its role of mediator? Is there any advice that you could give to these parties? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got about 15 or 16 people, so I'll have to go back to the normal quota of one question per person rather than 3 or 2 questions per person. But let's give it a go next with Masa Kanan of Jordan.
Hello, this is for Iraq's foreign minister. So my question is, how do you assess Iraq's role in regional mediation? I know a lot of people refer to Iraq's regional mediation, and especially in light of regional and international developments, how does it also hope to develop on its relations with Arab neighbors? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Matthew Simons from the UK.
Thank you, John. We heard yesterday that Iran may be only a few weeks away from being able to develop, well, to be able to produce a nuclear weapon or a nuclear device. We also heard that it remains American policy that Iran will not be allowed to have such a device. If Iran does make a dash for a nuclear weapons capability, and as it seems the JCPOA is actually pretty dead, and therefore there is not a diplomatic path to diverting it, what would the countries in this region want to happen next? What if the only option is a military one?
Thank you very much. Nufal Mazidi from Kuwait.
Hi, this is directed to His Excellency Dr. Naif Al-Hajraf. I wanted to ask about initiatives that the GCC had on de-escalating conflicts among GCC states, specifically historical ones and current ones. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll take a couple more before coming back to the panel. Tom Beckett.
Thank you. A question for Dr. Hussein, Foreign Minister of Iraq, would be, what is the Iraqi government view of the disturbances currently ongoing in Iran, and what does the future look like? For Secretary General Al-Hajraf, the same question: what does the GCC think might happen in Iran at the end of these disturbances? And really, I suppose one for all three, including Norway, is what sort of government does Iran need for it to be less intrusive in the affairs of its neighbors?
Thank you very much. Dana Allen.
Thank you, John. The Secretary General joins a long list of speakers from this platform talking about the centrality of the Israel-Palestine issue for this region. And Norwegian Foreign Minister has invoked the really admirable role of her country in trying to solve this problem. But when one asks whether we are looking at the inevitability and the consequences of a one-state solution, the answer usually is that the prospect is so abhorrent and unthinkable that we're not going to think about it. Just wanted to ask both of you if realism requires that we, even requires those who have been invested in this issue for so long to really think about what a one-state solution would mean and what the response would be.
Thank you very much. I think that's quite a lot to come back with the panel with, so I'll start with Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, sir, please.
John, thank you. There were various questions, but most of them is about Iran. First, this government, Iraqi government, this government is reflecting the Iraqi society, the political parties in Iraqi societies. It is a coalition government. There are many parties in the government and many parties in the parliament supporting this government. So talking about this government as if it is linked to Iranian government, I think that's not the right concept to use. It reflects the interest of the Iraqi people. We are an open society. The democracy started in Iraq since the removal of the regime of Saddam Hussein. But we are learning. We are making a lot of mistakes. And it is a fact that the regime of Saddam Hussein has been removed because of the struggle of the Iraqi people, but in fact because of the invasion of Iraq by many countries. So as a result, the intervening in Iraqi internal affairs became a fact. There were about 160,000 American soldiers in Iraq, and they were there until 2011. There were units of armies of many, many countries inside Iraq. So the influence of the neighboring countries in Iraqi society, in Iraqi politics, is there. This is a fact. But that doesn't mean that the government has to do with one of the neighbors. In this government, we have got political parties belonging to the Kurds in Iraq, political parties which has to do with the Sunni components in Iraq, and with the Shia. The political parties in Iraq, they are reflecting the components of the society. So the main components of the society, they are Shia, Sunni, and Kurds. And there is a clear balance, internal balance and external balance in this government. It is not about who has got sympathy or ideological relationship with a political system somewhere else. It is about the policy of the government. And this government is new. We will see how this government is going to function, which kind of policy is going to follow. But we made it clear for everyone, internally and externally. We are following a balanced policy, an equation which has to do with our neighboring countries. It was possible for the Iraqi government to bring all neighboring countries together while there was tension. And sometimes people were talking about wars, but it was the Iraqi government who brought all these regional neighbors together in Baghdad. There were tensions between Gulf countries, some Gulf countries and Iran, but it was the Iraqi government who brought these governments together to start dialogue with each other. There was tension between Iran and some other neighboring countries. We brought them together in Baghdad. So I think it is not fair to consider this coalition government as if it is an attachment of other government. This government, it reflects Iraqi interest, Iraqi society, Iraqi politics. As for continuing mediating or trying to bring other countries together, especially Iran with other countries. We are still in contact with both the Saudis and Iranian government, and we are still talking about that. This new government started just now, but we will continue our policy. We will continue our policy, and soon there will be Baghdad conference, version 2 in Amman, and once again, all neighboring countries will be together there. That's part of our policy. I think most of the question was about mediation and this government, John. The same question has been raised in Arabic language. I don't know, do I need to answer it in Arabic or كان هناك سؤال حول
Because there was a question about
الاستمرار بالتواصل
the continuity
المملكة السعودية العربية و
So the ongoing contact between KSA and Iran and the possibility of going on with this dialogue, I think that we will be able to do so. We have the will, we have the desire, the desire from both capitals to go on with this dialogue. We will try to see how can we really relaunch this dialogue. Of course, there we have some new novelties. We have new events related to the ongoing negotiations that didn't reach any conclusions concerning the JCPOA between the US and the Iranians. So this is something new, and we have another novelty related to the internal situation in Iran and the demonstrations that are taking place there. So this is something new, and this may have an impact on the internal policy in Iran, in addition, of course, to the relationship of Iran with other states, namely with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, because the Iranians have their own opinion regarding their the internal demonstrations. They consider that these demonstrations have a regional dimension that is extra border. They also they accuse the Kurdistan of it, not only Saudi Arabia. So we consider that this is not the first time that we have demonstrations in Iran, because demonstrations had happened previously. This is the first time that such demonstrations take as long. And this is the first time that demonstrations are taking place in different cities. But anyway, this is an internal issue. We are following up on the situation in Iran, but we consider that this is an internal affair.
Maybe if you just want to offer one reflection in English on the question that was asked about whether the only option remaining on the table in order to ensure that Iran did not have a nuclear weapon was a military one. What would be your thinking around that proposition, given, as was suggested from the floor, that the United States has said that it would not tolerate a nuclear Iran, and there's at least one other country in the region that...
Was that question for me, or was it for my...
It might have been for representatives of the region on this panel, so I just give you an opportunity.
I don't know if the Iranian will continue this process when they will reach their target. But it is obvious they have got the know-how. They have got the technology, and they have got the experts to reach what they want. And then the question is, who's going to forbid them and why? This is an important question. People were hoping that the negotiation in Vienna will solve this problem. But in recent months, they stopped even talking to each other, although they were talking to each other indirectly, not directly, never. Sometimes I was, or Iraqi government, we were talking to the Iranian and also to the American side. But nowadays, they stopped even to have indirect talks. And our area is entering a dangerous situation, I may say. We in Iraq, we are encouraging having dialogue between Washington and Tehran. Part of it has to do with our internal interest, national interest, but part of it has to do with the peace in the area and peace in the world. When I'm saying part of it has to do with our internal interest, because the conflict between Washington and Tehran, it reflects itself directly on Iraqi soil. Conflict between Washington and Tehran, it reflects itself directly in Iraqi parliament, in Iraqi politics, in Iraqi society. So it is in our interest, in Iraqi interest, to help if we can, or to encourage both sides to continue the negotiation in Vienna. And we will do our best, because we can talk easily to the Iranian side, as we can talk easily to the American side, because of our history and because of our geography, because of mutual interest between Iraq and Iran, and because of good relationship between Iraq and United States. So we can play this role. But we are really very much worried about the tension now, once again, between Washington and Tehran. Perhaps has to do with the internal situation in the United States. There was just an election, or perhaps has to do with the internal situation inside Iran because of the demonstrations. But stopping talking to each other directly or indirectly is very, very dangerous. Not only for both countries, but it is very dangerous for the region. And we are, government of Iraq and people of Iraq, we are very much worried about that.
Thank you very much. Secretary General.
Thank you, Dr. John, and thank you, Dr. Fouad. Just for clarification, Dr. Fouad and I, we both were Minister of Finance, and some meetings we are used to some kind of question that's very complicated. So sometimes I ask him to answer, and now I think it's your turn to ask me to answer. But it's of course, if we zoomed out, and I will elaborate on most of the question that was raised from the audience, which is all valid questions. If we zoomed out and try to see what was the agenda of the Manama dialogue, the first session of Manama dialogue back in 2004. I think few of us were there. And what is the agenda of the 18th Manama dialogue? And what will be the agenda for the Manama dialogue in 5 or 10 years' time? It's all central in the region's security. And from what we've heard last night and what we heard this morning, there is a strong belief that the stability and security in this part of the world, in particular, is extremely essential and important for the rest of the world, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the East, North, or South. So this is a fact. Otherwise, we won't be able to have a room full of audience from every different part of the world trying to understand what's going on in this region, because it has an impact on other regions. Talking about economy and economy 101, we learned that if the Wall Street sneezes, everyone catch a cold. In today's reality, back to the reality, in today's reality, if anyone sneezes, everyone catch a cold. So back to the questions, whether what is the chance of dealing with the military standoff between the West and Iran, The question is, can the world afford such scale? I don't think so. Iran will always be part of this region. This is something that we recognize and something that we have been addressed several times. We can't change geography, we can't change history. Always will be part of the world. What we are asking, and this is very clear back to the strategy Praghda was asking for, what we are asking Iran is to be a responsible partner in this region for the prosperity of everyone. Over the last 40 years or so, I highlighted what the GCC stands for. It stands for security, stability, prosperity. What we have achieved collectively over the last 42 years is something that never happened in one's lifetime. This is what our strategy is, to develop this region and beyond. At the same time, make no mistakes, we will protect our interests. We will protect our security. And this is something cannot be questioned. We are calling for our partners, our friends, everyone to engage in a stabilizing role, which we at the GCC are extremely committed, genuinely. We need to have a normal relation with Iran. We need to have a stabilizing region. We need to look into our brothers in Iraq and see them flourish. We need to see our brothers in Yemen and see them engaging in their lives. We need to see our brothers in Syria, in Lebanon, Palestine, in Libya, and elsewhere. But if we zoomed out and we try to connect the dot, it doesn't require the magicians to figure out where is the cause. So with that, rather than addressing the results, let's addressing the cause. And the cause requires a dialogue, respected dialogue, a dialogue where a goodwill should be introduced. We cannot just speak the superiority of the uninvolved. We are involved. Why? Because we are part of this region. In fact, we are this region. We do understand our region better than anyone else, with all due respect. And we need others to share the same understanding. Such a platform that the IISS is providing is exactly what we need. We need to develop a mutual understanding. What is the priority in this region? What are the priorities in other regions? How can we collectively develop a mutual joint action work that will not turn off everything overnight? We need commitment, we need focus, we need to be able to deliver. We need engagement from all different parties. And I think this is the message that we need to make sure that everyone in this room, everyone outside, is clear of who we are, what do we stand for, and what we are hoping for. Tomorrow, for example, the world will look into the World Cup opening in Qatar. Last year, we had Expo in Dubai. The year before, we had Saudi Arabia sharing the G20. Do you think this all will happen without maintaining the security and peace and prosperity? It goes line in line, despite the pandemic and what it's caused to every one of us. So our message is very clear. This region is so vital to everyone's security. The potential in this region is quite remarkable and historical. And I think working with everyone is the message that we need to leave as we are concluding the IISS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Foreign Minister of NATO.
On Iran, I just want to be very brief that the government must listen to the demands of the people based on human rights and also the rights of women and girls. And even though we're not a member of the European Union, we have imposed all the sanctions and we have condemned violence against women and those who are out in the streets. And I will also commend Mr. Hussain for his efforts, because I think that dialogue is always worth trying. The question on one-state solution in the Middle East, I think is a very, very important question that you are raising, because this two-state solution is now under tremendous pressure, because every day steps are taken in the wrong directions by convictions, new settlements. So there is only one alternative to a two-state solution, and that's a democratic one-state solution. That's the only acceptable alternative, and we should make this clear to Israel, that this is the only acceptable alternative. So I believe there are still possibilities for two-state solutions, but steps are taken in the wrong directions every day.
Well, thank you very much. So I have a bit of a strategic dilemma, which is I can either bring our proceedings to a precise conclusion at 4:30 p.m., or to go back to the 16 people on this list and delay our conclusion another 45 minutes. I've taken an executive decision, which is to stick to our schedule, in particular because the style and substance of the answers to the question we just heard had a concluding quality to them, which I think we should elegantly accept as the end of this session. And I just want to say, again, two things before you thank the panelists for their remarks. The first, to say what a pleasure it's been to chair this session during the day, and I hope all of you still have a chance for a number of informal meetings in the rest of the day and evening. There are some here who will have received an invitation to a reception at Sahir Palace, which will begin at 6:20. In order for it to begin at 6:20, those who have this envelope and the badge within it need to form up outside the ballroom exit of this hotel no later than 5:15, because the transport going to Sahir Palace will leave at 5:25, 5:30, no matter whether the car is empty or full. So please be present in your transport by 5:25 and ensure that you wear the badge going into Sahir Palace. The reception is intended to complete by 8 p.m., so all of you should be back in your accommodation no later than 8:30. But with that final logistic clarification for the day, can I invite you all to thank our concluding panelists for this session. Thank you.